Welcome to the new age of science, the age of Truffle Pigs.
Allez, voilà une truffe.
My friend Stjopa and I were chatting the other day about the future of science in the age of AI, and how potentially in this new age where AI can do a lot of grunt work, as well as potentially identify new interesting lateral connections, there could be a different kind of skill that could be useful in science alongside the traditional skills. And in the middle of the conversation, I remembered this guy. If you don't know who that is, well, you should. This is Freeman Dyson. He was an absolute legend of science. Even though he was a bit of a rebel, he didn't have a PhD, and he was very proud of it. You may have heard of Dyson spheres, for example, this theoretical engineering construct that allows you to encapsulate, enclose the entire star so that you can harness all of its energy. He worked at the Princeton Institute for Advanced Study, right? That's the one that you saw in the Oppenheimer movie.
Yes.
And so he worked with Oppenheimer and Einstein and with von Neumann and with Feynman. I mean, with like a legend. But the reason I remembered him in the context of this conversation was this lecture that he gave in, I think, 2008 or 2009 to the American Mathematical Society, presenting an idea that there are two kinds of scientists that Dyson called birds and frogs. Both kinds are very useful, and in order for science to move forward, you need both kinds. Birds are sort of kinds of scientists that soar up into the sky and can see the full scientific terrain and discover a new way of looking at it and discover a new way of mapping it. So, you know, Einstein is famously a bird, getting up there and seeing, well, maybe if we see gravity and the shape of space as the same thing, all of a sudden we can make sense of the full scientific terrain. Birds could not do their job unless there were also a bunch of frogs. And frogs were the kinds of scientists who sit down there in the mud on a very small patch of scientific terrain, but they dig around and they muscle around and they solve those problems individually. And then they can hop to the next problem. So Freeman Dyson himself considered himself to be a frog, right? And he was a very productive frog. He worked on individual fields and then solved the specific problems and then hopped to other fields and solved problems in those. I was thinking that maybe in the age of AI, there could be a third kind of species that could be useful in the scientific context. And I call them the Truffle Pigs. I mean, Truffle Pigs are humble. They're pigs after all. They don't necessarily have the capacity to be a really good frog because they may not have the technical knowledge or the training. They don't have the capacity to be a real bird because that requires obviously a whole new level of thinking as well as the understanding across a bunch of things. But they may be useful in a sense of having a bit of a weird research taste. Right, and that's what truffle pigs do. They basically have a sense. They have their magic nose that points them in the direction of where there could be truffles. And all they do is they just go there stupidly, and then they point their nose to where the truffle is. If you have an interesting, weird, unusual kind of taste, really.
I'm decisive about what I like and what I don't like.
You read that strange book from whatever 1950s that very few people have read, and then you also read the new things that are coming out from the frogs in different fields, and all of a sudden you start connecting the dots and going, oh wait a second, there could be something interesting right there. The problem is that historically, somebody like that could not really be a useful contributor to science because they would, they may have that hunch that there could be something interesting there, but they don't have the capacity to dig around and to show that there is truly something interesting there worth going into. And so at best, maybe they would write sort of philosophical essays or poems or songs or talk to their scientist friends and hope that they get inspired enough. But now I think truffle pig type scientists or scientific contributors could actually be useful because what you can do is if you're a truffle pig and you have a strong enough hunch that something is there, you have a good taste, and you have not just the taste but the tenacity and the foolishness and the desire to kind of go in and spend a week figuring that out, then you as a pig can go in there and then employ a bunch of AI birds, and they would help you map the terrain and understand it better. And then you can also employ a bunch of AI frog-type scientists, right, who would go ahead and do some digging. And obviously you have to control them, you have to poke them, at least for now, and you have to push them in the right direction and validate that what they're doing makes sense. But you don't need to have really specific and very narrow skills to do that. If you have the basic understanding of the scientific method and stay there for a week or two, I think you can potentially make a real contribution. And your contribution as a scientific truffle pig is not to then necessarily make the real discovery. Probably, science is hard. Probably you would need to have a bunch of real scientists joining in, but you can now do enough of a sort of pointing and digging to attract the real frogs to go ahead and do the job. The problem is, in the scientific world, there is a lot of risk averseness because you have the pressure to publish, you have all of the pressures in the academia that discourage you from necessarily going on those of wild expeditions. But as truffle pigs who are outside of academia, and obviously I consider myself to be a bit of a truffle pig, we can actually do that. And then if we find something interesting enough, then we can point our noses to that, and we can prove with our amateur but now fairly decent work with the help of AI agents that there's something there worth digging for, and then the frogs can actually come over. Recently, I had a bit of an example of that, which made me very happy. I had a hunch about a certain kind of behavior of LLMs that could be there that nobody seems to have studied. This was about ethical judgment and how their actions might not always follow what they believe, quote unquote, is ethically correct. Basically, I managed to make enough of a dig and enough of there's something interesting there, that now some friends from Oxford and from University of Leiden coming to me and saying, yeah, this seems interesting enough. We'll put a bunch of scientific minds together to actually go ahead and dig for real. So me as a truffle pig managed to do something at least useful enough for the science frogs to come over and start digging with me. Obviously, you still need birds. Obviously, you still need frogs. But maybe people who are a bit more of a truffle pig when it comes to science could all of a sudden be useful. And if conceptually that makes sense, that maybe there needs to be some sort of a platform, if you will, for the truffle pigs to go ahead and sort of drop their ideas and drop their pointings and drop their hunches so that everybody else can go ahead and look at it. But anyway, that's a wild theory about the future of science, and I think it's going to be wonderful because, like I said, all of a sudden, different kinds of minds, such as the truffle pig kinds of minds, could actually be practically useful, which was not the case for the last maybe 200 years, and now it's the case again. And it's beautiful. So if you have an interesting taste, and that's one thing that you should definitely be doing, cultivating an interesting, different, weird kind of taste. And then if you have the tenacity to go ahead and spend a week or two, even though you're an amateur, sort of digging around, then I think the limits are very, very far away for how much you could contribute to science. And that's what I'm going to be doing, not as a trained scientist, but now as a trained truffle pig, if you will. And that's what I would encourage everybody else to do, because I think we could make wonderful contributions.